Ya terminamos Atomfall. Y pues, nada, hemos estado jugando un poquito Assassin's Creed, un poquito Jedi Survival. Quizás juegue Jedi Fallen otra vez. ¿Qué más tengo por ahí? Tengo un par de cositas más para jugarlas. A ver qué he bajado. No, tengo Atomfall, que obvio es lo que estamos esperando. Ya borré de la lista Abo. No les voy a mentir. Abo fue para mí, aunque el combate de Abo yo le doy un 7. El juego fue un 10 de 10 la experiencia. ¿Y por qué? Hace tiempo no jugaba un jueguito que no tuviera que preocuparme por ninguna microtransacción. Que no tuviera que preocuparme absolutamente por ningún shop adicional, ningún Battle Pass. Podía hoy, si no quería, acostarme a dormir tranquilo y no pasaba absolutamente nada en el juego. Wow. Qué tranquilidad. Atomfall. Vamos a ver esto. By the way, el Game Pass. Fuera de vacilón. El Game Pass para mí es el best deal para aquellas personas que quieren estar jugando diferentes cositas, explorando diferentes juegos. Entonces es la oportunidad. Si estás en PC, date la oportunidad.
When I emerged from a quarantine zone bunker into the lush green surrounds of England's Lake District during Atomfall's opening moments, my mind didn't immediately go to Bethesda's Fallout series like I had expected. Instead, I thought of Elden Ring. That's because, while not nearly as enormous in scale, this survival action adventure takes a similar approach to From Software's 2022 masterpiece, in the way it drops you into a foreign land with no clear idea of who you are and only cryptic clues as to which direction to go in, trusting you to find your own fun and unearth its many mysteries organically as you carve a path through its varied and often intimidating terrain. It's a freeform storytelling structure that successfully kept me completely engrossed and consistently surprised for the 15 hours it took to roll the credits, despite some occasional struggles along the way due to inconsistent combat encounters with enemies as brutish as they were British.
Windscale, the pride of Britain, nestled in the picturesque.
Y eso que no ha visto el combate de Assassin's Creed Shadows.
Plant has transformed this rugged landscape into the envy of its northern neighbors.
Inspired by the real-world Windscale nuclear disaster that occurred in northern England in 1957, Atomfall's story takes place 5 years later within a fictionalized and meticulously crafted quarantine zone that has been walled off around the ruined reactor site and its neighboring village, woodland, and farmland areas. Cut off from the outside world, rifts have formed amidst the surviving populace, pitting and occupying military presence against a number of rival factions, and thus conflicting moral quandaries are posed as you choose which quirky quest givers to align with and which to betray, in a flexible system that felt more inspired by Fallout New Vegas's ambiguity than Fallout 4's more rigid ethical options.
Fallout 4 sigue siendo un juego tan y tan espectacular hoy en día que a veces a mí me dan ganas de ir y jugarlo. Y todo, es como que hasta visualmente es una loquera.
Further heightening the sense of paranoia around each tough decision I made were regular communications from an unidentified voice in one of the many red phone booths found throughout the world, routinely ordering me to trust no one as though I was accepting repeat prank calls from Agent Fox Mulder.
Ese va a ser el vueltón, el telefonito rojo ese ahí, la cabina.
In addition to your main efforts to uncover the truth behind the Windscale accident, there are numerous mini-mysteries to solve along the way that can be picked up in conversations and found in discarded documents inside the many unique structures to explore around Atomfall's 5 interconnected maps. Within its opening hours, I quickly found myself sidetracked with enticing distractions, like investigating the murder of the vicar's assistant in the Wyndham Village Church.
No lo culpo, yo soy igual. Me tiraba en un open world y la misión es hacia el norte y yo estoy por el este. Porque había un rumor por ahí, escuché cosas y seguí explorando y llegué al otro lado. La real.
Or trying to determine who or what was locked up in the residence above the local bakery.
But I've got nothing to hide, nothing at all. I haven't.
Sometimes I solved these leads with diplomacy, while other times they ended in violence.
Ooh.
And the various leads and conspiracies only grew more tantalizing and morally murky from there. Where it truly feels different from the status quo is that instead of the compass at the top of the screen telling you exactly where you need to go next, Atomfall does a great job of directing you more organically by teasing out subtle hints instead. It largely allows you to piece these puzzles together yourself by actually measuring out longitude and latitude coordinates on its map, deciphering the vague description of a certain location, or catching your eye with plumes of chimney smoke rising from a distant farmhouse.
En este juego y todo, según tú empieces y las conversaciones que tengas, hay historias alternas, ¿sabes? Uno de los, por lo menos creo que fue de los gameplay que estuve viendo anteriormente, el final preview, algo así. Una persona hizo una historia y aparecieron roboses y todo, y otra persona hizo otra historia y ni siquiera aparecieron.
And that kept me grounded in the world and had me poring over every detail in my surroundings in a way that few other games do. It felt refreshing to have a game map clear of typical open world clutter, and to be allowed to use my own curiosity as a compass, rather than being immediately grabbed and steered around by an obnoxious series of waypoints like in so many other open world adventures.
Elden Ring. Mira que mucho problema tuve yo en Elden Ring. Mucho problema tuve yo en Elden Ring con eso.
Welcome to what's likely the last pub in Cumberland, such as it is. Now, what can I do for you?
En Elden Ring
it's also quite novel to experience a survival action game that is so endearingly British. Atomfall is an adventure that introduces one eccentric side character who sounds like the Major from Faulty Towers.
You'll forgive me if I'm less than cordial on first acquaintance.
Oh, yeah.
And another that's the spitting image of Queen Elizabeth II.
You must forgive me. I wasn't expecting visitors today.
It allows you to craft a poison bomb using a pint glass you nicked from its local pub.
Beer at the pub tastes like sheep dip.
Or replenish health by tucking into a Cornish pasty. Or reduce your heart rate by sipping on a warm cup of Earl Grey. Although it admittedly comes in the wake of the Fallout London Total Conversion mod that incorporates that same flavour, Atomfall's detailed slice of northern England still feels like a wonderfully unique place to set a sandbox shooter, and as an Aussie who grew up on a diet of imported BBC television shows, it results in a personality-packed world that feels both foreign and strangely familiar at the same time. The contents of its mysterious quarantine zone are also shaped by the best of British sci-fi and folk horror. There are the more overt examples, like the deadly flowers that bloom to intimidating heights in its woodland areas, and look as though they've been replanted straight out of the Day of the Triffids, as well as the towering wooden statues that are obvious nods to the Wicker Man.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees!
Actually, I meant the 1973 original, but now that you mention it, overacting Nicolas Cage, there are also swarms of killer bees to be found in here
Mira!
too.
Okay. Up.
But there are also less conspicuous illusions that had me second-guessing my own senses.
El
At one point, I could have sworn
el combate parece creado literalmente por Bethesda.
That I saw the outline of the familiar blue phone booth belonging to a certain British doctor on a distant hilltop, only to find that when I climbed up for a closer look, it had apparently shifted itself to another space or time. Pretty much the only thing that isn't very British is the weather, with no...
What in the fucking shit? ¿Sabe? Embuste en este juego me van a pasar esas cosas. Mira, 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 mira. Él mirando ahí.
Guessing my own senses. At one point, I could have sworn that I saw the outline of the familiar blue phone booth belonging to a certain British doctor on a distant hilltop, only to find that when I climbed up for a closer look, it had apparently shifted itself to another space or time. Pretty much the only thing that isn't very British is the weather. With no weather system or day-night cycle, it's nothing but sun.
Yo que soy de los que pierde las cosas y no sé dónde las pongo ya. Yo, ¿dónde dejé esto? Cuando esté jugando esto yo. Tripping. ¿Había algo ahí o me lo imaginé? ¿Is the game o soy yo tripping?
Sunshine in Atomfall's quarantine zone.
Creo que vamos a llegar
this
a
not
eso.
only results in one of the least dreary post-apocalyptic game worlds I've ever explored, but it also makes for a startling contrast every time you transition into the dark depths of one of its many subterranean bunkers and caves.
Okay.
It's within these underworld installations that the bulk of Atomfall's combat takes place, against marauding outlaws, druid fanatics, feral mutants, and lumbering killbot sentries, each likely to mercilessly snuff you out in an instant should you storm into their turf unprepared. It very quickly became apparent that despite its similar sandbox structure and facilities with multiple entry points, Atomfall is a far cry from a Far Cry in which you can single-handedly gun down an army from fairly early on.
You will be more use dead.
Your character is more of an everyman who's popped out of a bunker 5 years after a disaster, so it makes sense that your melee swings are desperate and deliberate, you're slow to chamber each fresh round into your rusted shotgun or rifle, and your heart rate redlines with too much physical exertion and loosens weapon stability, challenging you to keep your cool when the heat is on.
Ok, so el juego hace que sea más difícil para ti.
By design, you're less of a well-oiled killing machine and more like a shopping cart with one wonky wheel. Therefore, Atomfall demands careful preparation and execution in order to survive each encounter, and that resulted in a reasonably steep and satisfying learning curve on its recommended survivor difficulty level, as I learned what I could handle and what I couldn't, often the hard way.
I've done it now.
Thus, I quickly settled into a slower and steadier stealth approach, particularly once I got my hands on a bow during my battles with the druids in the Casterfell Wood zone.
Nice.
Archery is effectively silent, so it doesn't easily draw an enemy's attention to your whereabouts as you're thinning their numbers, and more often than not you can retrieve the arrows lodged in your victim, so I rarely found myself running low, unlike when I was relying on the hard-earned and quickly spent shells of my shotgun. When my cover was blown and things did get loud, I found Atomfall's fighting to be exhilaratingly rough and tumble for the most part, but also noticeably inconsistent.
El combate.
Sometimes it's frustratingly unfair, like when I'd be squeezing under a half-closed roller door and get ambushed by a series of life-sapping shotgun blasts before I'd barely come out of my crawl animation.
Silly fool, don't know what this is.
Oh man.
Conversely, there were other times when its enemies were comically inept, like when I'd lure a group of them up a ladder like a line of Lake District lemmings, and use my cricket bat to smack each British bandit squarely in their stiff upper lip.
Let's have a look.
Look at all these Englishmen lining up to be whacked around by an Australian's bat. What is this, an Ashes series? What I do appreciate though is that should you encounter patrolling enemies away from their home bases and you give them a wide enough berth, the only thing that's at risk of getting hurt are your feelings after they tell you to sod off.
No va a ser tan difícil.
It's nice that they don't shoot on sight because your only method of travel in Atomfall is on foot, so getting from one corner of its sizable world to the other would have been quite cumbersome if I had been constantly getting dragged into firefights every few steps.
Never return here, heretic scum.
That said, although it may have been detrimental to its commitment to immersion, I still would have appreciated the inclusion of a fast travel system of some sort, since there's a fair bit of backtracking in the story's second half that's only mildly mitigated by the secret sewer access points and smugglers' tunnels I discovered along the way that provide welcome shortcuts between areas.
Yo siento que él está ñangotado todo el tiempo ahí. Bebo, párate, corre un poco, no tengas miedo.
Atomfall's skill tree is quite streamlined, but to be fair, it probably didn't need to be overly elaborate given the story's short and sweet 15-hour length. There are 4 main categories: ranged combat, melee combat, survival, and conditioning, each with 9 unique perks to choose from, and I pretty much invested most of the stimulants I gathered into unlocking slow motion aiming for my bow and making my sneak attacks even more silent. However, if you're more melee focused than I am, you might opt for the buff that increases damage output with each melee inflicted kill, or enhancing the power of the kick attack to stagger enemies for longer, for example. There are no major surprises here, but there's enough to suit a number of different playstyles, and after playing through Atomfall concurrently with Assassin's Creed Shadows, which by comparison features a skill tree with more branches than an untouched bonsai, I came to appreciate the unfussy nature of Atomfall's setup. Crafting is equally straightforward, with every piece of discarded scrap.
Assassin's Creed Shadow. Ese fue un juego que quizá en verdad nunca debieron haberlo ni lanzado.
Metal, glass, or liquid you scavenge
Pero ya
throughout
está
the
aquí.
environment, thrown
Y
into the
Yasuke
same
va a
pool of
sufrir.
resources to create everything from bandages to nail bombs,
Como el
and
peor.
eventually pristine and more powerful versions of the junkyard pistols and rifles, which were invaluable to use against the more formidable foes encountered during the pointy end of the story.
Woo.
Thankfully, these can all be done on the fly, rather than having to stop what you're doing in order to seek out a workbench.
Nice. Podemos craftear sin un workbench. Eso me parece perfecto in the run.
Still, by far the most satisfying thing to craft in Atomfall was my own fate. While I managed to keep several of the main factions on side right up to the story's climax, in the end I was forced to make a decision that had a satisfying outcome for my character, but severe consequences for others I had taken as allies. From what I can work out, there must be at least 5 different potential outcomes to arrive at, and from what I've seen so far, I'm invested enough that I plan to revisit an earlier save point to try and unlock them all. That should involve visiting a number of different areas I neglected to explore during my initial playthrough, including the lower reaches of a shuttered medical facility that's glowing a fairly sinister shade of blue, and is just begging to be investigated.
Bebo, ¿cómo tú resististe no seguir? ¿Sabes? Mínimo yo me voy a echar 80 a 100 horas en este juego. Porque es que yo me niego a acabar un juego tan... ¿sabes? Yo no puedo hacer una historia de un open world tan lineal. Bebo, yo me voy a ir 100 veces a explorar cosas que no son. A caminar por todas las esquinas. Es increíble. Ok. Eso es lo que yo quiero ver, los robots, eso, a ver qué dan, si dan luz, bueno o no.
Survival action adventure that takes some of the best elements of Fallout and Elden Ring and synthesizes them into its own fresh mutation. It presents a picturesque chunk of English countryside, littered with alluring structures to pique and reward your curiosity, eccentric locals to meet, and absorbing mysteries to unravel, and uses classic iconography from British sci-fi and horror to consistently unsettling effect.
Unauthorized personnel may not, under any circumstances, enter the...
In spite of some enemy behaviors that are occasionally less stable than a reactor in Meltdown, Atomfall is a compelling post-apocalyptic survival story that satisfyingly bends to your choices and discoveries no matter which direction you take.
Un 8 me parece bien. No tengo ningún problema con un 8. Entiendo que este jueguito, vuelvo y digo, está para Game Pass. Es como que Assassin's Creed ahora mismo, vuelvo y digo la diferencia. Un juego que tú le das un 8, un open world, entraste y cuando le diste Start, viste un shop y tú, acabo de pagar 70 pesos. ¿Qué hay aquí? Armaduras. ¿A cuánto? A 20 pesos. ¿Y tú? ¿Qué? Esas armaduras bien lindas no las consigo en el juego. No. Esa es la diferencia para mí entre un 8 en este juego y un 8 en Assassin's Creed. ¿Sabes? Este juego es todo in-game. By the way, este juego que lo puedes comprar si tienes Game Pass. ¿Sabes? Está hasta en una suscripción. Es como que... For real. Nada. Yo creo que... Vamos a enviarnos a Assassin's Creed. Yo no sé ni para qué estamos ahí. Cuando lo tiren en el Game Pass o cuando lo bajen, lo pongan en especial, probablemente a mitad de año o a final de año, hablaremos un poquito más. Quizás hayan mejorado algunas cosas en el combate. He visto NPCs parados y le siguen dando y no se mueven. He visto tantas cosas tan horribles que quisiera defenderlo, pero es imposible. Vamos a jugar a Atomfall. Lo vamos a jugar. No se preocupen. No olvides que después ir en donde Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, X para que vacilen conmigo. Vean lo que estamos haciendo. Vamos a jugar esta semana. Yo creo que ya empieza Atomfall. Vamos a ver realmente cuántos días exactamente son los que quedan. Antes de yo seguir aquí hablando. Atomfall. Lo tengo aquí. Dios mío. Vaya abriendo lo que no es aquí. By the way, baja un jueguito ahí, Mullet Mad Jack, que lo voy a probar, se ve cool. Está bien, ábreme el... Vamos a escribirlo acá porque esto no quiere... Vamos a buscar aquí cuántos días quedan para Atomfall. 3 días. ¿Qué es hoy? Lunes, martes, miércoles. El jueves será. Ya el fin de semana vamos a ver cositas. Los veo, corillo.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.